everybody. My name is Stephany Kirkpatrick. I'm the founder and CEO of Orum. We are the simplest API integration for all things instant payouts. With one API, you can access RTP, same-day ACH, FedNow, and more. And I'm excited to be here today to chat a little bit about what we're doing at Orum and my mental health journey. Orum's a fully remote company. We were built during pandemic times. We've got about 45 employees across 30-ish states in the US. I think we have a really unique perspective, both based on my background and what we've experienced as we built a company remotely on the topic of founder mental health and employee well-being. So I'm excited to have this conversation. A lot of my story starts with my dad, who is an immigrant who came from the former Yugoslavia, spent 8 years waiting for refugee status, and ultimately entered the US and began to build a life here that I think really shaped both who he would become and ultimately who I became, and why I'm so interested in and passionate about financial services and building a set of infrastructure tools that can fundamentally change the American wallet. My first job after college was working in the retirement industry, and kind of the way Orum actually ends up getting started is that we were building something. I became a certified financial planner because I found that I really wanted to help other people figure out what to do with their money. And I think, tying back to the roots of my dad, how do you help people who have less have more and give them the advice, the context, the information, and education that they need? And so I ended up having this really cool experience where a CD-ROM, which makes me sound old, didn't come, right, that we were expecting. And like the software update that we relied on to do something critical for financial planning, it stopped coming. And I remember that day at work, everybody's like, what are we gonna do? And so I convinced my boss at the time to give me a budget, $10,000, and I was gonna go on Elance, which is now Upwork. And I hired a developer in India American who had just moved there to build an offshore team, and told him what I wanted to build. And he said, you're gonna have to send me some wireframes. And I was like, I don't know what that is. So I'm quickly Googling what are wireframes and figuring out how to give him the context of what we wanted to do. So fast forward, we ended up building a really incredible product that ended up getting acquired into a bank. And that was kind of the taste of pursuit of the intention to say, I could do this, I can build this. And I think there's a better way. I think the pursuit of constantly looking for 0 to 1 opportunities, whether it's corporate innovation or it's pure entrepreneur, is really what drives me. Like my interest, my curiosity, my passion is to just solve uniquely interesting problems. And so at a certain point, the curiosity to come back to fintech was just too high to resist. And what I'd seen at Northwestern Mutual after we sold LearnVest was this sort of gaping problem in how the financial system actually works, right? Why does it take 3 days, 5 days, if on a holiday weekend, 7 days to move money between bank accounts for consumers, for businesses? What's underpinning that problem? And how can we make it better? And that is why we ended up focusing on modern payments infrastructure at Orum, so that we can be the backbone to the next generation of financial services and the problems that used to exist for liquidity, access to cash at the right time, earned wage access, the ability to put dollars in the hands of customers or businesses at the right time and instantly, and not just when banks are open, but truly 24/7, 365, I think is going to revolutionize the way we think about financial services. So when I think back on my mental health journey, I think it's really colored by a couple of things that started to show up in my childhood, which is this big spike in a fear of flying, right? Which at the time, decades ago, I don't think there was as much awareness for parents and for the world about what might be showing up for kids, right? But I basically just was terrified to fly. And I actually still am, but because of the way the world works, I've had to work on how do I face that fear head on. And so from a very young age, I became kind of deeply fearful about being away from my parents, being away from home. I didn't do sleepovers as a kid. And I just basically formed a kind of, certainty that there was a lot that could go wrong in the world. And I started to feel that. And it showed up and manifested around some of these key things like flying that I just really don't like to do. And that carried, and I ended up having a pretty serious anxiety challenge through college, but particularly at the end of college, when the certainty of what I'm gonna do next is totally unclear. So there's a host of things, I think, in the journey for me that have gotten better, but it's taken real time and intention to focus on keeping that in balance and in check while also being in pursuit of an aggressive career path. Before I founded Orum, sometimes you're moving so fast in what you're doing, especially in a startup, right? I was in a really high growth startup that then ultimately went through an acquisition. And there's so many periods in that experience where you risk getting it wrong. And I think one of the allures of being an early employee or even a founder is this idea that like you are somehow connected to the big decision, right? You have autonomy. And then there's the fear that like, what if I get it wrong? And I can remember our founder at that time coming to me one day and saying, we've spent $5 million building the software that you've convinced us we absolutely should build from scratch. Are you sure we should keep building it? And you're sort of like, me? You're asking me? Like, my conviction is really high, but what if I'm the reason this doesn't work out? And that really just eats away quietly for me at this idea of kind of what we now call imposter syndrome, which is maybe I shouldn't be the one building it. Maybe I don't have enough experience. And so for me, that sometimes shows up as aggressive, like overcorrection, right? And I think this is probably common, is when we feel like we don't know, at least earlier in my career, it felt like I needed to just be more confident, be more certain, be a little louder with the conviction, and it would all work out. And I don't think that is actually the way. I've learned a lot of techniques to be able to expose the I don't know piece and solve for uncertainty differently. And I think when I began to think about jumping off, I thought, oh, I'll always be a great number 2. I'm like an awesome number 2, but I'm probably not a number 1. And it took a push to believe that I could be and should be a number 1, and that not being technical was not going to hold me back in being able to go found a very technical company in a very difficult space, which is payments infrastructure, where I don't have the background. I can't write the code. I can't even check that it's good code, right? It's sort of like somebody gives you a presentation in a foreign language and you have to believe that it was good information. And that is like a really big leap of faith. And that's probably been the places where I've felt, in some ways, the deepest worry that I won't be able to figure it out. But I'm glad I pursued and pushed myself past the imposter syndrome. And actually, that I'm in a place now to talk about it, because I think there are other people, and especially women, who generally don't go into computer science programs, who have great ideas, some technical ideas that they want to build, and that being able to be a voice for people to say, like, you can definitely build a company, build a team, and not be technical. Productivity and output as a CEO start to look different. And I think as you're going through the journey of all the things you've never seen before, when you suddenly stop being the person that builds the financial model, and you stop being the person that responds to every customer request, and you stop being the person that shapes the roadmap for the next sprint, because those are things you did as the founder on day 0, you start to question, am I adding value? And the reality is yes, but the way you add value is by balancing mental well-being with the strategy that you're trying to execute for the company. So picture yourself finally believing it's time to start a company and rallying your first handful of employees to do it with a very small pre-seed check, right? That was me in March of 2020. And on March 14th, 12th, 13th, something like that, New York shuts down. And then every city shuts down, and this totally unforeseen black swan global pandemic comes. And the hope and certainty of great idea, a great moment in time, great opportunity, great team, suddenly becomes an absolute unknown. Will investors write checks? Will we have customers? And in the startup journey for many people who didn't start companies during the pandemic, they sat together for these super hard days, weeks, months, from company formation to first something, line of code, partner, whatever it may be. And so all of a sudden we were isolated. The whole world's experiencing an unbelievable, unforeseen, and frankly unprecedented pandemic experience. And there's absolutely no certainty in how we should be leading our lives. My kids suddenly can't go to school, my childcare, like our whole mental state went from optimism and hope to a dark period. And so that's the beginning of Orum, right? That's where it starts. Now, fast forward to today, 45, 50 employees, we're a fully built remote company with great infrastructure to manage that we're in our Zoom boxes. But at that time, the idea that we would be able to ever raise another dollar was a total unknown. I think the job of the founder, and why I think the mental health of the founder is so important, is to help the team understand what's certain and what we control, and what's uncertain, and how we're going to work at taking a question off the board every day. While I think that the super big spikes of anxiety and depression have not shown up for me in the last 5 years in such a severe way as they did when I was younger, there are things I do, right? I'm religious about sleep, super religious about sleep above all else. And then I'm religious about activity. You might call it working out. Generally, it's like running or something active. It can be yoga, but like movement, where I am in the outdoors if possible, but I'm not at my desk. I'm doing something that is for me. And I think by putting those two things as a priority, I end up doing things that in the founder world feel weird, which is like to turn down going to the most popular dinner spot with a group of intimate other founders or investors I should be with. But my priorities are very clear to me so that I can be at peak performance, and so that the things that drive my anxiety or that drive that imposter syndrome to show back up are well balanced by the things that I know keep me in a really good place. And those priorities for me about keeping my good habits in place help that when I'm feeling, particularly isolated, I've now created a network of kind of a 911 list where there's other founders that I can talk to about that thing I'm experiencing and not worry that they're going to go whisper to the market or, think differently. I think that's kind of the biggest thing when you talk about mental health is if you say that there's anxiety or depression or fear or imposter syndrome, you might be judged as like lesser. I think the reality is our successes have a limit if we don't work through and grow through coaching, through therapy, whatever it is, the things that have now become challenges to that growth journey. And I think a lot of founders do hit a wall, right? Where they just can't overcome the set of challenges or ambiguity that's in there in building the business. For me, it's just wake up and do one more day. Wake up and put one more, don't quit today. And I think you hear that, but it's very real, which is every day I show up, somebody else that could be a competitor, doesn't raise money, gives up, changes course, every competitor in the market potentially does something different than we do today. Just keep going. And so one of the things that we do at Orum that I love is the first Friday of every month, we do Mental Health Fridays. We close the whole company that day with the exception of our on-call coverage, because we're obviously in a 24/7, 365 payments business. And so by doing that, we give everybody the chance to exhale. But running a remote company, my belief is that we have to find the intersection of mental health and the opportunity to do big things. Put the phone down, Slack will be there, silence your notifications, and put in the time to be part of whatever it is you do outside of your work life. For me, it's a lot about my family.